Okay, so I'm really excited to start this one. This was my favorite when I was growing up. Meet Molly. So, before we begin, I should go over the time period a little bit. This takes place in 1944, and this is when America has joined World War II. World War II happened as a result of a lot of stuff over in Europe. We had World War I, and as a result, this is a very quick and dirty explanation. This is not full detail. Okay, so the end of World War I, a lot of the blame was placed on Germany for starting the war, for their participation in it, and as a result, they had to pay a lot of money, amongst other things. They had to reduce their military, but they also had to pay the other countries a lot of money for the damage they'd done. So Germany was given a lot of the blame. And at this time period, a man named Hitler, seen there, rose to power with his Nazi party, and he kind of took over, and he had all these ideas for how Germany was going to get back everything that had been taken from them, and how it was wrong, how Germany was being treated, etc., etc. And he placed a lot of the blame for Germany's problems on people of different races and different religions, particularly Jewish people. But he also punished people of color, he punished people of different sexualities, he punished people of different, there was another one I had in my head, but other people, but particularly the Jewish people. And he, did I say people, gypsies? That would be the last one. So he, the things that happened to them are horrific. They were put in concentration camps, and they were killed in terrible, terrible ways. This all started happening in the late 1930s. And America did not get involved in the war. We wanted no part of it. But then on December 7th, 1941, Japan, who had allied themselves with Germany, which means they were working together to fight this war, bombed Pearl Harbor, which is in Hawaii. They did this to get one of our naval bases because they didn't want America to interfere as they went about their business trying to conquer some other places like, I think, Malaysia, some South Asian countries. They wanted to expand their empire, they wanted more land. They didn't want the USA to get involved, so they bombed us. They didn't want us to have our naval power. And at that point, America was like, all right, now we're in. So we joined to fight against Germany, Japan, and Italy. Those three countries allied together. So a lot of things from this war impacted Mali. And we'll see that, and as we go through, details will come up, and I'll explain them to you, and there's a peek in the past at the end. Okay? This book has seen a lot. Do you see there, like, stains? It's, like, torn up. It's from the library, so. I have my own personal copy of Mali at home, and that thing is, it's treated like a treasure. Like the treasure that it is. Okay. So Meet Molly, book 1. This is a Val Tripp, yep. So the illustrations are by Valerie Tripp. Or no, it's written by Valerie Tripp, sorry. The illustrations are by Nick Bax. So, let's take a look at Molly's family and friends. There's Molly. If I braided my hair, like, come on. Maybe that'll be my Halloween costume this year. There's her dad, and you can see her dad is in uniform. So he's probably off fighting in this war, right? Yes. I'm just saying that because I've read these before. This is Mom, her mother. This is Jill, her older sister. She's 14. She's always trying to act grown up. Over here we have Ricky, her 12-year-old brother. Brad, her 5-year-old brother, and it says Ricky's a big pest and Brad is a little pest. This is Mrs. Guilford, the housekeeper. And then there's Linda and Susan, her gal pals. Man, I love this book so much. Okay, so chapter 1 is called Turnips. Turnip for what? Okay. You're welcome for that. Molly McIntyre sat at the kitchen table, daydreaming about her Halloween costume. It'd be a pink dress with a long, floaty skirt that would swirl when she turned and swish when she walked. There'd be shiny silver stars on the skirt to match the stars in her crown. The top of the dress would be white. Maybe it would be made of fluffy Angora. Only Molly wasn't sure they had Angora back in Cinderella's time. That's who Molly wanted to be for Halloween, Cinderella. All she had to do was 1. Talk her mother into buying the material and making the costume. 2. Find some glass slippers somewhere. And 3. Convince Linda and Susan, her 2 best friends, to be the ugly stepsisters. I'm sure that's a hard sell. Can you imagine? I want to be the princess, and you could be the ugly stepsister. Nobody wants that, Molly. Nobody. Okay. She could probably talk Susan into it. As long as Susan got to wear a long dress, she wouldn't mind being a stepsister. But Linda was another story. If they were going to be fairy tale princesses, Linda would want to be Snow White because she had black hair just like Snow White's. Linda would want Molly and Susan to be dwarves. Probably sleepy and grumpy, thought Molly. Well, Molly certainly felt like grumpy tonight. She looked at the clock. She had been sitting at the kitchen table for exactly 2 hours, 46 minutes, and 1, 2, 3 seconds. She had been sitting at the kitchen table, in fact, ever since 6 o'clock when Mrs. Guilford, the housekeeper, called everyone to supper. Molly had smelled trouble as soon as she walked into the kitchen. It was a heavy, hot smell, kind of like the smell of dirty socks. She sat down and saw the odd orange heap on her plate. She made up her mind right away not to eat it. "What's this orange stuff?" she asked. Mrs. Guilford turned around and gave her what Molly's father used to call the Gladys Guilford glacial glare. "Polite children do not refer to food as stuff," said Mrs. Guilford. "The vegetable which you are lucky enough to have on your plate is mashed turnip." "I'd like to re-turnip," whispered Molly's 12-year-old brother, Ricky. "What was that, young man?" asked Mrs. Guilford sharply. "I like to eat turnips," said Ricky, and he shoveled a forkful into his mouth. Eating turnips, or anything alive or dead, was no hardship for Ricky. If it could be chewed, Ricky would eat it. Quick as a wink, all his turnips were gone. "That rat, Ricky," thought Molly. She looked over at her older sister, Jill. Jill was putting ladylike bites of turnip in her mouth and washing them down with long, quiet sips of water. Almost all the horrible orange stuff was gone from her plate. Molly sighed. In the old days, before Jill turned 14 and got stuck up, Molly used to be able to count on her to make a big fuss about things like turnips. But lately, Molly had to do it all herself. Jill was acting superior. This new grown-up Jill was a terrible disappointment to Molly. If that's what happened to you when you got to be 14, Molly would rather be 9 forever. Agreed, Molly. 9 is way more fun than being a grown-up. Let me tell you, from experience, I've been a grown-up for a while now. Hard to believe, but it's true. The turnips sat on Molly's plate getting cold. They were turning into a solid lump that oozed water. With her fork, Molly carefully pushed her meat and potatoes to a corner of her plate so that not a speck of turnip would touch them and ruin them. "Disgusting," she said softly. "There will be no such language used at this table," said Mrs. Guilford. "Furthermore, anyone who fails to finish her turnips will have no dessert, nor will she be allowed to leave the table until the turnips are gone." And that's why Molly was still at the kitchen table, facing a plate of cold turnips at 8:46 p.m. None of this would have happened if Dad were home, she thought. Molly touched the heart-shaped locket she wore on a thin chain around her neck. She pulled it forward and opened up to look at the tiny picture inside. Her father's face smiled back at her. Molly's father was a doctor. When American soldiers started fighting in World War II, Dr. McIntyre joined the army. Now he was somewhere in England taking care of wounded and sick soldiers. He had been gone for 7 months. Molly missed him every single minute of every single day, but especially at dinner time. So here we have a picture of Molly hating those turnips. Before Dad left, before the war, Molly's family never ate supper in the kitchen. They ate dinner in the dining room. Before Dad left, back before the war, the whole family always had dinner together. They laughed and talked the whole time. Now things were different. Dad was gone, and every morning Molly's mother went off to work at the Red Cross headquarters. Very often, she got home too late to have dinner with the family, and she spent at least an hour every night writing to Dad. When a letter came from Dad, it was a surprise and a treat. Everyone gathered and listened in silence while Mrs. McIntyre read the letter aloud. Dad always sent a special message to each member of the family. He told jokes and drew funny sketches of himself, but he didn't say which hospital he worked in or name any of the towns he visited. That wasn't allowed because of the war. And even though Dad's letters were long and funny and wonderful, they still sounded as if they came from very far away. They were not at all like the words Dad spoke in his deep down voice that you could feel rumbling inside you and filling up the house. Molly used to be able to hear that voice even when she was up in her room doing homework. And here they are getting a letter from Dad. And their mom's reading it. All the kids gathered around. When Dad called out, "I'm home," the house seemed more lively. Everyone, even Jill, would tumble down the stairs for a big hug. Then Dad would sit in his old plaid chair, cozy in a warm circle of lamplight, and they'd tell him what had gone on in school that day. Dad's pipe smoke made the room smell of vanilla and burning leaves. Sometimes, now that Dad had gone to the war, Molly would climb into the plaid chair and sniff it because that vanilla pipe smell made her feel so safe and happy, just as if Dad were home. Molly remembered the fun they had at the dinner table when Dad was home. He teased Jill and made her blush. He swapped jokes with Ricky and told riddles to Brad, Molly's younger brother. And he always said, "Gosh and golly, Ollie, Molly, what have you done today?" Suddenly, everything Molly had done, whether it was winning a running race or losing a multiplication bee, was interesting and important. Wonderful or not so bad after all. Dad loved to tease Mrs. Guilford, too. As she carried steaming trays out from the kitchen with lots of importance, Dad would say, "Mrs. Gladys Guilford, an advancement has been made tonight in the art of cooking. Never before in the history of mankind has there been such a perfect pot roast." Mrs. Guilford would beam and bustle and serve up more perfect pot roast and mashed potatoes and gravy. She never ever served anything awful like turnips. But everything was different now because of the war. Dad was gone and Mom was busy, so Mrs. Guilford, who had arrived at the dot of 7 o'clock every weekday morning in Molly's life to cook and clean, now ruled the roost more than ever. Mrs. Guilford was doing her part to help win the war. A victory garden was Mrs. Guilford's latest war effort. Last spring she sent away for a pamphlet called "Food Fights for Freedom," explained how to start a victory garden in your own backyard. The pamphlet had a picture of vegetables lined up in front of a potato and an onion that were wearing military hats and saluting. Under the picture it said, "Call vegetables into service." "From now on, there will be no more canned vegetables used in this house," Mrs. Guilford announced. "The soldiers need the tin in those cans more than we do. From now on, we will grow, preserve, and eat our vegetables. It's the least we can do for our fighting boys." And here's those veggies with their military hat. Yeah. Call vegetables into service. So victory gardens happened because, as she said, the tin in the cans was used to make weapons, machinery like tanks. Tanks may have tin, I don't know. But the metals were used to help make things for the war. So you couldn't really get tin cans, so people started growing their own vegetables, and that was called a victory garden. Why they grew turnips, who knows? I mean, that was a weird way to hold a mug when there's a handle on it. All summer long, Mrs. Guilford had tended her victory garden. She wore a stiff straw hat, Dr. McIntyre's garden gloves, and knee-high black rubber boots. Everyone, even little Brad, had helped her. Molly had worked in the victory garden every Tuesday morning from 10 to 11 o'clock. She had crawled on her hands and knees through rows of green seedlings, pulling weeds. The rows were as strict and straight as soldiers on parade. Each one was labeled with a colorful seed packet on a stake. The seed packets showed fat carrots, plump red tomatoes, and big green peas. But by fall, after months in the hot sun, the pictures on the seed packets had faded away. The packets hung on the stakes like limp white flags of surrender. Mrs. Guilford's victory garden had not been quite as victorious as she had hoped. All but the toughest vegetables had been beaten by the dry summer. The carrots were thin and wrinkled, the tomatoes were hard as nuts, the peas were brown. Maybe we should grow some vegetables. We could probably do that. I mean, what else have we got to do? Right? I mean, it is the year where everything's weird. All right. But that did not defeat Mrs. Guilford. Mrs. Guilford would never give up and open a tin can. She had a rather successful crop of radishes, lima beans, and turnips, so that's what they would eat. Turnip for what? As Molly stared at the turnips on her plate, she remembered Mrs. Guilford saying, "Wasting food is not only childish and selfish, it is unpatriotic. Think of your poor father off in some strange land. Maybe he didn't have enough to eat tonight. And you turn up your nose at fresh turnips, you will not leave this table until those turnips are gone completely." Now it was almost 9 o'clock. It was getting cold in the kitchen. Molly was lonely. She was tired of thinking about how unpatriotic she was. She looked at the turnips, lifted a tiny forkful, and put it in her mouth. Just then Ricky burst through the swinging kitchen door. "How do you like eating old, cold, moldy brains?" he teased, then he ran out. Molly swallowed the turnips fast, then gulped down a whole glass of water. Old, cold, moldy brains was exactly what the turnips were like. She would not eat one speck more. I relate highly to Molly right now. Turnips are not my favorite. "Ricky, you rat," she said. "I'm going to get you." She started to get up from the chair. From behind the door, Ricky chanted, "Na, na, 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 you can't leave the table. You haven't finished your turnips." "Ricky, stop it," yelled Molly. But Ricky was right. The turnips were still on her plate and she was stuck. To make matters worse, Molly heard her mother calling goodbye to the carpool she rode with from Red Cross headquarters. Now Mom will be mad at me too, thought Molly. Now she'll never make a Cinderella dress for my Halloween costume. Now everyone in the house will be mad at me for making Mom upset, all because of these terrible turnips. Mrs. McIntyre walked in the back door, looked at Molly, looked at the plate, and knew immediately what had happened. "Well, Molly," she said, "I see we had the first turnips from the Victory Garden for dinner tonight." "Mom," said Molly, "I hate turnips. I know I do. And Mrs. Guilford says I can't leave the table until I eat them. I'll be here until I die because I will never eat these. Never. I really mean it." "I see," said Molly's mother. "Do you mind if I join you for a while? Not until you die, of course, just while I have a cup of tea. And while I'm heating up the stove, why don't I reheat those turnips for you? They certainly don't look very good when they're cold like that." "It won't help," said Molly. But Mrs. McIntyre scooped up the turnips and put them in a frying pan. "I'll just smooth out these lumps, and I think we can spare a little bit of our sugar and butter rations to add to the turnips," she said almost to herself. "And a little cinnamon, too." Soon a delicious, spicy aroma filled the kitchen. The kettle whistled, and Mrs. McIntyre made her tea. She spooned the turnips back onto Molly's plate and put the plate in front of Molly. The hot steam from the turnips warmed Molly's face and clouded her glasses. She took a deep breath, raised a small forkful to her lips, and tasted it. It wasn't so bad. In fact, it was pretty good. Sweet, cinnamony, and kind of like applesauce. Add cinnamon sugar to anything, and it's pretty good. I mean, maybe not like tacos, but it felt good going down, not at all like old, cold, moldy brains. She ate another forkful. Mrs. McIntyre sat down with her tea. "When I was about your age," she said, "my mother made sardines on toast for dinner one night. Little oily dead fish on toast. I refused to eat them. But my mother said I could not leave the table until the sardines were gone." Gone was exactly what she said. So when she wasn't looking, I put each sardine one by one into my napkin. Then I stuck my napkin into my pocket. When my mother saw my empty plate, she was surprised, but she excused me from the table. I used to play checkers with my father every night after dinner. That night it was very hard to concentrate on the game. Our two cats, Bessie and May, yowled and meowed and climbed all over me. They smelled the sardines. Finally, when I had one hand on Bessie and the other hand on a checker, May pulled the napkin out of my pocket. The sardines spilled out all over the rug. Bessie and May gobbled them up. "Oh, Mom," laughed Molly. "Oh, Molly," sighed Mrs. McIntyre. "Sometimes we have to do things whether we like it or not." There aren't always cats around who will eat the sardines. She reached across the table and brushed Molly's bangs out of her eyes. I know this war is hard on you children, and I know you miss your father. I miss him too. So here's a picture of this lovely moment at the kitchen table with Molly and her mom. Everything is so different with Dad gone, said Molly. Nothing is the way it used to be anymore. The war has changed things, said Mrs. McIntyre, but some things are still the same. Isn't Ricky still Ricky? He sure is, said Molly. Still dumb old Ricky. And you are still my Ollie Molly, said Mrs. McIntyre, and I'm still me. She gave Molly's hand a squeeze. Molly smiled. The turnips were gone. Mom was not mad. Mrs. Guilford wouldn't think that Molly was ruining the war effort. Thanks, Mom, she said as she gave her mother a hug. She walked carefully up the stairs to bed, pretending she was wearing a long, pink, floating skirt that swished as she took each step. All right. So that is chapter 1. I hope you're enjoying Molly as much as I am, because it's bringing back a lot of memories for me. And so in my next video, I will be reading chapter 2. I think most of the books we've been reading have had 5 chapters. I think this one only has 4. So I will see you tomorrow for chapter 2. Or tomorrow, my next video. I'll probably be in like 2 minutes. All right, bye.